Welcome to another episode of Communications Breakdown, where we break down what works
and doesn't
in health and science communication. I'm Tracy Meehan.
And I'm Katrina Boylan. Today, we're going to bring you the first in a 3-part series that gives us a glimpse into what young professionals looking to work in public health, communications, medicine, and other fields are seeing and hearing as they get ready to enter the workforce. I recently recorded interviews with some of our interns, and Tracy and I each listened to the interviews and then got together to break them down. What you'll hear in this episode and the next two is that conversation broken down into 3 parts.
So the first episode starts with the state of health communication education and some gaps that exist. And then we kind of focus on accessibility, what it is, how important it is, and how they learn how to actually do it. In the second episode, you'll hear about language, using data for communications, and then a little bit in the end on Canva and graphic design. And then finally, in the third episode, we'll get deeper into creativity and graphic design, as well as the importance of structuring and planning for dissemination of your messages.
So let's introduce and say thanks to the 3 young women who worked with us. We're going to hear from Elena, who majored in communications and only recently found health communication and had no experience with data and research. We're going to hear from Yara, who majored in communication technology, who had a lot of experience in research and public health. And then we're also going to hear from Juliet, who majored in public health and has a strong interest in maternal and child health.
We're going to start by hearing from them why they looked for a health communication internship in the first place. I love this question because I'm always curious to hear about what got them interested in health comm and what they are hoping to get by working with us. Let's listen in.
So we're going to start here with Yara.
The whole idea was that for me, learning about health communication through textbooks and lectures was just not enough. I knew I was interested in it, but I really wanted to get hands-on experience with it. I had, prior to this, done some research on health communication jobs, but there weren't very many opportunities, and especially not ones that combined like health communication with research like this internship had. It was mostly like corporate communication, stuff like that.
And next we have Elena.
And I'm hoping that I am able to do work similar to what I've done in this internship in the future. I think that it's super important, and there's a large gap in the way that information is conveyed to the public, because not everyone has the ability to interpret a high-level knowledge that is often construed in like medical studies and academic studies.
And finally, we have Juliet.
So I think it was my sophomore year of college, or actually my junior year of college, I took a public health class called Role of Behavioral Health or something like that. And it was about health promotions. And with my degree plan, that was one of the only like health promotion classes I actually experienced. So like before that, I hadn't really, I think I had known generally, just like knowing about like the world itself, that like things like health communication, health promotion existed, but I hadn't taken an actual course in it. And I ended up becoming really interested in the topic, and that kind of being one of my main public health focuses. And then I think last year I was researching different health communication, health promotion internships, and I was really interested because within public health, that always had a really big interest in maternal and child health. And so I thought this would be like a great opportunity because it's more, there's some research aspects of it, like working with the like translational research team, doing all that stuff. But then there's also more like social media, more image-focused things, which I also liked because I had experience with that from a extracurricular club. And so I knew that coming in, I would be able to learn new things about health communication, but then also actually use some of the limited experience I had to like further grow with health communication.
Okay, so I had heard a couple of things there. First is something that you and I have talked about ever since you've been here, and it's something I've heard pretty consistently since I've been working with interns, is that students might be getting some exposure to the idea of health communications in their classes, But if they are, it's not a lot, and they aren't really getting hands-on real world experience in the way that they're looking for. Several of them mentioned that. And these interns and many others that we've had in the past told us that they really want that more practical experience with health comm, that they're actively looking for it and they're having trouble finding opportunities. And I think it's really important for public health programs to hear that and think about how can they more actively partner with organizations that can help provide these experiences to their students. The other thing that I heard that kind of stood out to me was how aware they were that most people don't really know how to read or make sense of medical and academic studies.
Yeah.
And they are seeing this large gap between these dense studies that come out and what the public can grasp. And I'm guessing COVID has a lot to do with how people are seeing that now, right? We saw people not being able to understand the research and the impacts of what that was. And so they said to us, we're interested in learning how to build this skill.
Yeah. And I can see how that would be hard to do in a classroom. So I think one of the things that I hear too is that we need to figure out how to translate some of this into the classroom, because not everybody is going to have the opportunity to come through an internship like ours. And so how can we teach these skills more in the classroom, integrating that theory rather than just, kind of giving it to them and then moving on. So, okay. So I think that then leads to the next question. And so, speaking of what they're doing in class, I also asked them how this internship compares to what they were doing in class. And so let's hear what they had to say.
No, I've experienced nothing like this. A lot of what I do in my classes is very academic textbook based.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's no substitute for an internship. I feel like I have just learned so much and I would have never gotten that otherwise.
On the content creation side of things, not really in my education. We would just really go over like existing health campaigns,
Okay.
like critique them, assess them, and just, I don't know, like study research articles as well. But it wasn't really creating it.
And even with classes, you receive kind of feedback at the end and that's just a grade. And obviously you can take that feedback and I guess help further assignments. But for the most part, it's like once the grade is there, you can't really do anything with the feedback. So I thought with this internship, it was good that I received multiple rounds of feedback and I was actually able to like build on those things. And I do think as my internship time like continued, I was able to actually make those changes before. Like if someone corrected me on something of like, oh well, don't do this or this is better, then I feel as though the more things I worked on, I didn't do those things as much anymore. So I do feel I learned like things that were maybe better for health communication or even things that maybe are not allowed, but are maybe not the best practices in health communication, which I didn't really know about before because besides that one class I discussed, we don't really have like a health communication course or anything like that.
So again, a few things stuck out to me from those. The ending comment there about how they don't really have a health communications course. I think that's really true. And we'll see that in some of the questions that are coming up here. But the thing that really struck me when I was listening to these clips was this concept of the feedback loop that Juliet mentioned.
Yeah.
She kind of commented on how in school the feedback you get is one-time feedback at the end of the project with a grade. And that really stuck with me because, she commented on in this internship, the iterative feedback that she got along the way was what really helped her grow and learn and practice those skills, right?
Yeah.
And she talked about how each time she got feedback, she could incorporate it into another task. And she could see her incremental growth. And I thought that really struck me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, same for me too. I hadn't thought about it that way.
And I think there's power in that type of feedback that continues to build. And I will say, having gone through a PhD program myself in more recent years and being a TA for classes, it is hard to give that type of feedback in a classroom especially when you've got 80 students in your classroom, you just can't give that level.
No, that's a great point.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I think that's important. And the other thing that it really made me think about is how different the stakes are when you're working on a project that is actually going to be used as part of a real campaign by a real organization. Our organization's reputation is on the line with everything that we put out into the world.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to let something go out the door that isn't of the highest quality. So when we give feedback to our interns, they see it as real and tangible. And I honestly think it's a surprise for a lot of them when we tell them, no, we can't use this. And here's why. And then we teach them what it looks like to do it differently and how to make their work something that we can use. And that's not feedback that you can get in school or even when you're trying to simulate an experience. The professor, most cases, isn't telling you, no, that absolutely can't be used, and then teach you how to change it. That's just not feedback that you get in many cases. So there's that different kind of impact that they get from that experience of really watching a no turn into a yes and seeing it get used.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing that we really do try with this internship is to give them that real world taste of this is what we go through all the time. And I do think it's pretty eye-opening the levels that we look at any given product. It is something that I've heard frequently, but I do think your comment about it goes back to what Elena said about there's no substitute for an internship because you simply cannot not only provide that feedback to, the students in your class on that level, but also you're simply not, as you've said, adding in the stakes of it all, the real world aspect of it is like this is going out to in some cases thousands or of people. And I think it was Yara say that, they would review campaigns, but not necessarily create them either. And so even just the process, I think, of how did we even get to it? As you said, we said no, but how can we get to yes?
Yeah, and we've had people reach out to us to work with their classes. That's not an internship, but it's like they want to do a campaign for a real life thing. They're going to plan for a real life organization and you work with them. But even in those, I think they're incredibly helpful, but you have to make sure that the organization you're working with can say no along the way and give feedback. In some of those cases, they met with us at the beginning and asked our ideas and maybe sent us a question or two by email and then presented at the end, as opposed to working along the way. It's more work for the organization, so I'm sure it's hard to get people signed up in that way, right? But it just might be another type of way to get the work in there.
Yeah. No, and I think, though, that is one benefit we can offer is, doing that individual one-on-one that not everybody can do, as you said. And it's important to think about the broad range of experiences that we can be offering to people, not just what we do. So,
yeah. And there's nothing that can replace that real hands-on experience and letting them watch what it looks like to put the theories they are learning about in their books into practice.
absolutely. And actually, that is a great lead in to our next question. And we're going to hear these interns now talk about what experiences they had using research as the basis for developing messaging or just applying the theories that they're hearing.
So in my studies, I was taught how to conduct communication research, like how to measure and understand the findings, and just how to read the articles in general. But I had never applied it to any real organizations. In my classes, we'd have to come up with a theory or hypothesis, and then just do our own thing and come up with a bunch of numbers and
Okay.
I guess it was just all practice, not really for anything.
Okay. So it was maybe the first time you had a topic, had to research it.
Right.
Right. Okay. So you had not had experience doing that before, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, in terms of health communication, no. It was just like random things we'd come up with.
It was a little daunting. I think that the team really helped me through it. They they kind of knew that this wasn't my area of expertise, and this was my first time looking at it. So they kind of helped me through the process, but I definitely feel a lot more confident looking at it now.
The first thing that came to mind for me after hearing these was that we do a pretty good job of training our students how to read and understand research for themselves, or in some cases, depending on their degree, even conduct the research. But we don't do as good of a job of teaching them how to read research with the goal of helping other people understand it. And this is something I have learned and seen working with students throughout the years that just they're not getting the practice with that. And the other thing that really stuck out to me was I think it's important to note here that we purposely take people in our internship program that are not just in public health programs because we know that out in the world, a lot of people that end up communicating about public health topics weren't trained in public health.
I was not.
Right.
Yeah. I was not at all.
So it's interesting to me because the last one we heard was our communications intern, and she told us she had very little experience reading public health research and even less with the goal of identifying key messages and interpreting that for the public. And it's fascinating to me because many scientists that we work with rely on their communications team at their institutions to do the translation of their work. And yet many comms people haven't been trained on how to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's you're yes about Elena with the lack of research experience. There is a skill I have learned in how to train someone to read a publication for messaging or for a communications purpose rather than looking at it through is the science sound or that maybe epi or a different type of public health approach. And so that is one thing that I think we can also help other people do. And, we're trying to do not only through this internship, but through CERTSI, for instance, is that messaging for public health based on the data, you're going to look at the data differently than through, again, like that epi lens or something else. And so even if you have a lot of experience, as you said, in you know, more of the epi side, or you're looking at more that the data crunching, the way that you look at those numbers is going to be so much different. And what I heard from Yara is that I think she said that she had looked at again those numbers and things before and read articles about kind of how to do it, but she had never looked at a paper, looked at it from a health com perspective, and then pulled that messaging. And again, it's that different look at the same research. She had seen the research through kind of the epi side, but not through that health com side. So I just want to tease that out a little bit also for our listeners, that there's a difference between reading research for health com purposes and health com research. And so, there is research on things like, health literacy and numeracy and things like that relating to health com. And so it's a little bit of a nuance. We use health com research in our health com practice, but we're translating in most cases, epidemiology research.
Yeah, there's a difference that I don't think everybody quite gets of looking at research to be able to accurately portray what the research found to other researchers versus looking at that research and telling somebody who doesn't have a research background or a background in that kind of research, what's the so what for me? And how does this work matter to me? And how do I talk to you in a way about this research that might help you change a behavior, for instance?
Yeah,
The
that's a great way to
whole
put it.
different skill set.
Yeah, it's a great way to put that. Yeah, totally. Okay, well, let's then move on to the next question. And I really like to ask I'd like to ask each intern, what is something that they didn't know that they know now? Because that type of open-ended question, I get some really fascinating answers. Um, I've asked this question on most of our exit interviews, and so again, we've only just recently started recording them. But I will say that this is one of the most fascinating questions because I personally don't know what I don't know about these students and what they found valuable, but by learning about what they're finding valuable, we can then help tailor that for future students. So let's hear what they had to say.
Well, I knew it generally was a thing, but I think when working on a lot of the visual components, like the accessibility. So I obviously like I knew like what accessibility was. And even with, making items accessible, I think in my head I was just like, oh, like alternative text, that makes sense, and like those kind of things. But I didn't really think about the importance of color contrast or font size or even like the repeatability of images themselves. Like if it's like you're putting a very small image and no one can tell what it is. I think that like I knew what accessibility was, but I think it kind of showed me the other ways that it's important. Like I think a lot of people when they think of accessibility, they think of like these really big things. Obviously those are incredibly helpful as well. I think you also have to think about what's these small things that a lot of people are not realizing and it's making certain things inaccessible to them, especially when you're talking about, childhood injury prevention and things like that. In the US, literacy is also not always super high. So it's like even that is being accessible by writing in ways or using certain images over just um like paragraphs of text. So I think that was something that was really helpful. And I think I've also like started using it in my more everyday life. Like the club I'm a part of where I'm doing the social media, like before when I would make certain event posts, I would kind of just make it based on aesthetics and be like, okay, well, that's fine. But then now I've started realizing, okay, well, maybe I should actually check if this is accessible to people or if it's not. And so I think that's definitely something that is important on, big things, but also even small things. Cause it's like, yeah, like why doesn't everyone deserve accessibility, even if it's like a club poster or an Instagram post? Like, why not make that accessible?
And accessibility, idea of accessibility, I had not thought about that before. I think the biggest thing I learned with content creation and just everything that I was doing in this internship, I was thinking about like my language use and accessibility, like with every step of it. It allowed me to see like an entire new side of content creation and just a new audience. I had never thought about like alt text and all of those things beforehand.
I really loved it when Juliet said, why doesn't everyone deserve accessibility, even it's a club post or an Instagram post?
Mm-hmm.
It really struck me how new the concept was for her, if that was a revelation, right? And so, it made me think about how much we focus on thinking about all the different types of people that might be interacting with our campaigns and our messaging, and at the real focus of our team to make sure that our content is accessible to everyone, even people with visual or hearing challenges, whatever different level of accessibility you might have to this material.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have two interns who are telling us that this isn't something that they had been taught to think about before or how to do it in practice. Yeah. And it was my experience as well. I've been out of the program for a few years now, but it wasn't something that I even remember, honestly, ever coming up. I had to seek out a class. I think it was in the sociology department on health literacy. It wasn't even something that I could find in the public health department.
Yeah.
So I think as a field, we can do a better job of thinking about the little things we can do to make the content we're already creating accessible to everyone.
Yeah, I think the other point I think I can draw from this is that sometimes what we can offer students isn't necessarily the most obvious things. I think a lot of people that I have seen out in the field are practicing accessibility, pretty pretty regularly. We notice that some things have caught on more than others, but I'm seeing alt text, pretty much in a lot of spaces now, and so I'm struck by the idea that sometimes what we can offer students isn't necessarily even kind of the biggest stuff in a way. It's just the opportunity, I think, to come in and see all the pieces that we consider when we're putting out campaigns or even just, again, content on social media. But again, we do know that not everybody's doing this all the time, and we're not perfect either. But it is, to me, surprising that it hasn't kind of trickled down to academia a little bit more. And so that just tells me that, again, maybe the people who are the instructors, haven't been out and able to see this stuff, kind of firsthand themselves. And so how then do you bring it back to your classroom? So I guess that it, to me, is also a call to maybe, again, work more closely with schools of public health or something about this workforce, this thing that we're doing in our workforce right now more regularly. But, again, we're hearing from the students. They're like, yeah, we knew a little bit, but not enough, not what they should know. This is a real gap in a skill, in my opinion.
Yeah, you just made me think of something else too. I think you're right. I think if you are in, public health departments or places like that, we are seeing that work happen more often. I think we can all always improve more, right? But I
Absolutely.
see that more. I think the interesting part for me, though, is kind of thinking about this academia angle that you brought up. We aren't seeing it as much there. And this is an area that I have taken on personally. Every single presentation that I give, I make sure I go through and do accessibility checks.
Yeah.
Everything from adding alt text, even in PowerPoints, and reading order and, visibility and how it looks. And I do not see other researchers doing that. And I think there's this kind of perception of, well, I'm talking to other people in academia, and it's almost like the people who have different abilities in academia are invisible. And I can't tell you how many times I have presented in an academic setting and had somebody come to me afterwards and say, thank you for making that accessible. Nobody does that. And in those situations, I didn't know that person needed it and was in the audience. I did it because I always do it because I want it accessible to everyone in case, because I don't know.
Right.
So I think it is important for all of us, even if we're in the academic spaces, to realize how important making our work accessible is every time we talk about it.
As we said in the introduction, it made sense to divide up this conversation. So this is where we're going to end the first segment. The second and third parts are available now, so please check those out. And as always, please like, share, subscribe, comment. You can even text us using the link in the description box or the show notes. But, we do really appreciate your thoughts and feedback. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and YouTube as CIRTC. That's CIRTC. And once again, we really do appreciate you listening. Until next time.